Well, I have a confession to make, and it's bound to raise more than one eyebrow. It's probably going to initiate more than one offended email, and it's not that I'm trying to make anybody mad. It's just that we tell the truth around here, even when it comes to not so flattering realities. So I have a confession to make. Are you ready? I've been cheating on you. And by that, what I mean is that every good church pastor knows that they should have an exclusive favorite day of the week. It ought to be Sunday. Church day is sort of prescribed for church leaders and preachers everywhere to be the overwhelming source of joy and anticipation. Somewhere, somebody decided that out of the 7 days of the week, no worth their salt pastor would have any other day that would come close to bringing as much joy into their lives as this day should. Church people sometimes even call this day the Lord's Day. And the not so subtle but never spoken implication about that is that the other 6 days are not the Lord's days. So how on earth then could there be any other day that would rival this one? It should be my favorite day. And I love this day. Don't get me wrong, I really do. But over the past few years, almost 4 years, I've been cheating on you. Fridays have become my other favorite day, my co-favorite day, because most Fridays, all or some of my granddaughters descend on Angie and Papa's house. And we have so much fun. So much fun. Between the trampoline and the swing set and the reading books and baking and doing some crafts and taking long walks and sometimes doing a little fishing and running around the house and sometimes crashing for a well-needed nap, their need, not mine. And now that they're getting older, we get to have like real life conversations together. Since Susan and I became grandparents almost 4 years ago, and since we've had the blessing of being close with all 4 of our granddaughters, we see them often. We take lots of pictures and we talk about them all the time. Don't ask if you don't want to know, because we want to tell you how amazing grandparenting really is. More important than telling you, we'd like to show you from our inventory of millions of pictures. And it's not just true for me and Susan, and it's not just true for grandparents. See, most of us here today have something in our lives, something in your life that you love to talk about, something you're really excited about. Maybe it's something that's happening right now, like a current event. Maybe you got engaged or you just got married, or maybe the wedding is approaching. In any of those scenarios and 100 others, you tell your friends, right? You show off your ring, you publish the pictures. When you have a baby, when you get a new job, when you finally get the car you've always wanted, some people in our church lose your minds when hunting season comes. Or when the weather breaks and you can break out the golf clubs and you talk about that trophy buck or the eagle you shot. That's a golf term, not a hunting term. We get excited about the new business venture or the vacation destination or the and 1,000 other things that you might be excited about. And the question that I want us to consider today in the wake of Easter, with the reality of the resurrection of Jesus fresh on our minds, is, are we at least equally excited about that? We came face to face with something that ought to change our lives more than anything else, including marriage and career and kids and yes, even grandkids. But while we talk about all those other things, or whatever the thing is for you, while we talk about the thing, do we ever talk about the real thing, that one thing that changed our lives or should have changed our lives more than anything else, the thing that we had with that encounter with Jesus? Do we talk about that? And by we, what I really mean is you. In the wake of the Easter resurrection reality, as we unpack now the now what questions of it all, I want us to look at how you and I are supposed to be able to talk about our faith in a way that allows all the excitement of it without all the awkwardness and weirdness of spiritual conversations that seem to be stereotyped on the community of people who are supposed to be followers of Jesus. How do we do that? And to get there, I want us to look at what happens with this one guy in the Bible whose life was radically changed by Jesus too. It happens in John 9. He's the only one that tells us about this. He says, as Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples, the disciple just means closest followers, Jesus' closest followers, asked him, Rabbi, sometimes they called him that, it means teacher, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, this is a Jewish context. Jesus and his closest followers, they were raised Jewish, and the way that Jewish people, the way that Jewish thought reconciled life's struggles and misfortune that might come to somebody, they did that by blaming somebody. In their thinking, specific suffering was always linked to specific sin directly. So they would say if you have some kind of disability or some kind of anguish in your life, some kind of trouble in your life, it's because of a sin somewhere. But you and I know, we can just intuit deep down inside that our struggles just can't always be made that nice and neat. They can't be packaged that way. So who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It was an innocent question. It's what everybody would have asked. But Jesus answers like this, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Jesus announces right here that God is going to do something good out of this guy's bad circumstance. And look, if you take this passage all by itself, if you pluck this out and don't put any other scripture or context around it, one could argue maybe that what Jesus is saying here is that God wanted this guy to spend all of those years suffering and build up to this moment right here. If you take this passage like this, you can make it say that God made him blind for all those years just for this moment. But it seems clear to me, if we'll step back and look at all of Jesus' other teachings about God's care and his love and his provision for his kids, that's you and me, it would be hard to make that argument. Instead, you'd have to say, well, God did not make this guy to be born blind. Again, taking all of Jesus' teachings together, I would argue that Jesus is saying, listen, this did not happen because of a specific sin, which he does say that, neither. It didn't happen because of a specific sin, but God is going to use this man and his situation to display God's power. God's going to use this man and his situation to display God's power. And I want you to imagine with me for a minute, because I like to live in the text. I want to be inside the story. So imagine with me for a minute what this guy would have felt, what his emotions would have been triggered inside of him when he heard these words, because his entire life, he had been taught that his blindness was somebody's fault. And he would have been labeled that way and identified that way. His whole life would have been defined not by his blindness, but by the nebulous some kind of sin that was attached to it. So as a child, parents would keep their kids away from him. As an adult, no woman would ever consider marrying him. As a worker, somebody who just needed to eat, no employer would ever consider hiring him. He was dirty. They looked at him as cursed. He was like visible sin. Maybe he sinned while he was still in his mother's womb. Maybe his parents sinned and just passed the curse on to him. Who it was may have been in question, but what it was, that was super clear. This man was blind because somebody sinned. Now imagine you'd been hearing that your whole life, and you've been wearing these labels that weighed you down like unclean and sinner and damaged, second class, worthless. And you would hear people say, on the side, they didn't think he could hear, at times, and they thought they were out of his earshot, and they'd say things like, no, don't play with him. He might be contagious. Don't even get near him. Don't talk to him. Well, the guy had to eat, so he resorted to begging. He just begged. Having long been stripped of any dignity, He relied on pity in order to eat, and maybe a couple of courageous family members who in the secret, shadows of darkness might give him some level of human interaction. That was it. So when he heard those disciples, when he heard them ask Jesus this question, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It made his head drop further if that was possible. His shoulders would have sagged. His blind eyes would have filled with sorrow and regret for what? He had no idea, just for being born, I guess. So imagine, it's hard for us to grasp the power of this moment. Imagine what he would have felt like when he heard Jesus' response. Who sinned? This man or his parents? Jesus says, neither. Neither one. The guy's not blind because of somebody's sin. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't his parents' fault. In fact, Jesus never really deals with the question except to make the most powerful, incredible statement. He says God's about to do something in this man's life that will point the whole world back to God. I mean, check this out. This is what Jesus is saying. This guy used to represent sin, which is the opposite of God. He's about to represent God, which is the opposite of sin. So this man, I see the scene. Imagine he's got to turn his head towards Jesus. He's got to be thinking, am I going deaf too? There's no way Jesus just said that. It can't be right. And then the most remarkable thing happens. Jesus sits down on the ground and he mounds up some dirt and sand. And John tells us Jesus then spit on the ground and he made some mud with the saliva and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. And so the man went and washed and came home seeing. Now, imagine if this happened today to somebody you knew. How would you react? This guy who can now see, check this out. He's got to close his eyes to find his way back to his parents' house because he has no idea how to get there with visual landmarks. He's never seen them. The only way he's ever made this journey is in total darkness. So if this happened today, it seems predictable to me what it would be like. The guy gets home, he throws the door open, he yells, "Mom, I can see. And she comes in the room and realizes that it's true, and she cries, and he cries, and dad cries, and they post pictures all over whatever social media feed they had. They'd be a YouTube sensation like overnight. Within seconds, the whole world would know. But that's not what happens to this guy. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man that used to sit and beg?" And some claimed that he was, but others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." So instead of getting tons of affirmation for this miracle, what he gets is skepticism. They question his identity. Is he really the same guy? They question that he was ever blind in the first place. Maybe he's just been faking all these years, which is complete silliness. They question if he can really see. Maybe he just pretends like he can see now, and he can't. I bet that when he went in the pool, Jesus puts the mud on his eyes, right, and sends him into the pool. And he begins to wash like Jesus told him. And imagine that the light begins to come into his eyes for the very first time. And he starts to see for the very first time. And at least as I see the story, I don't think he cares anything about what's on his face. So I don't think he finishes washing. It's not like he really cares about that. The only thing he cares about is that he can see. So I think he hurries out of the pool, still with some of that mud on his face here and there, which is evidence of what Jesus has done. So they ask him, how then were your eyes opened? They demanded now. They're not smiling, not celebrated, not embraced, not joyfully accepted. They demanded an explanation. See, this did not fit into their worldview. You don't just wash sin away. This wasn't about blindness. You were sin, somebody sinned. That's why you were blind. People don't spit in the mud and put the mud spit on somebody's face and then they see all of a sudden. That's not the way this happens. So how were your eyes open? They demanded, and the man replied, well, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, told me to go to Siloam and wash, and so I went and washed, and then I could see. Seems simple enough. The crowd, though, they're not buying it, and they don't want to go astray, so they call in the religious leaders, and the religious leaders ask how this guy gains his sight, and he says exactly what happened. Well, Jesus told me to put mud in my, Jesus put mud on my eye, told me to go wash, and now I can see. But the Pharisees, they turn again to the blind man. What have you to say about Jesus? I mean, it was your eyes he opened, and the man replied, well, he's a prophet. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, which is their way of saying, stop lying. Give glory to God. We know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. And he replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see. You might not have caught this, but this man's experience, recorded for us in the pages of John chapter 9, it has enormous and profound implications for you and me, especially with Easter barely behind us. So I want to unpack it at least briefly, and I want to talk about how it applies to our lives. To me, this is one of the cornerstone, most powerful stories in the whole Bible. And I always found it a little bit peculiar. I mean, if you read anything about Jesus, you know that he never has any problem, well, rarely has any problem healing people with just his voice. I mean, he just speaks it and they get well. Or sometimes his mind, he just thinks it and they get well. Occasionally, even just touching his clothes without his knowledge, and people get healed. So why the mud? Why the spit? This is the only time Jesus makes like a soil saliva concoction. What's that all about, really? Why didn't Jesus just command the guy to be able to see again? He could have done it. Or why not put his hand on him? Sometimes Jesus did that and command sort of the sight demon to come out, the blindness demon to come out, and the guy could see. He could have done that. This guy who's blind, he had resolved that he was never going to see. He figured he'd be blind his whole life. He didn't even ask to be healed. So why didn't Jesus at least wait for the request? I've studied this story a lot. And I'm not saying that I'm sure I'm right about it, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about it. I think the mud wasn't really for this guy. I think it was for everybody else, including you and me. And the mud represents something really important, vitally important to the lives of people who say they're followers of Jesus. I think Jesus puts the mud in the guy's eye so that he would have evidence, not just that he could see, but to prove that Jesus is the one who made it happen. I bet he took some of that mud after it dried, and I think he kept it like it was worth $1 million. Probably put it on the mantle in his house or some safe place, so it was secure. Or maybe he kept a piece of it in his pocket. See, it wasn't just that he could see. It was that Jesus made it happen. And like my grandkids or your wedding or your new job or the new baby or the upcoming epic vacation or whatever it is you talk about all the time, I bet this guy could not shut up about what Jesus had done in him. And I imagine they ask him, how'd this happen? He runs into people and somebody says, oh, I heard about you. You were the guy that used to beg. You were the guy that used to be blind. And now you can see, right? And he says, yes. And they say, how'd this happen? And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a piece of that dried, nasty mud. And he says, I don't really know how, but I do know who. See, I had an encounter with Jesus Christ. And what I can tell you is I was blind before him. And now I can see. And so they asked the guy, detailed questions about who exactly is Jesus? And then the guy answers, ultimately, I don't really know. And I don't know the answer to all your questions. But I do know one thing. I know one thing. I was blind, and now I see. You can imagine that people ask me, spiritual questions a lot. And maybe they ask you, maybe you get some spiritual questions from time to time. The questions I get are all good questions, like really good questions, seriously. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? How could a righteous, loving God who is also all-powerful let, terrorists, behead and torture people? Like, how do you reconcile that? People will say to me, explain the Trinity. Like, I don't get the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit thing. And how can God be everywhere at the same time? Like, how does that work? And what's heaven like? And is my dog there? And how old is the earth? And where are the dinosaurs in the Bible? And I get questions like these and literally 1,000 other questions. And my answer is, man, I don't really know. I mean, I can speculate. Look, I went to school for a long time. I can try to understand the Bible as best I can. I think I'm pretty intimate with the Bible, but here's the bottom line. I'm not sure about a lot of things. That's just the honest answer. It's probably not the answer you're looking for, but I do know this. Like, I know this. I had an encounter with Jesus Christ, and he radically changed my life. That much I do know. And when people come face to face with the truth about Jesus, they have to ask the question, now what? Like, now what? Last week, and Pastor Angie Frame helped us to see that we have to decide. Like, you have to make a decision. If you come face to face with the proposition that Jesus was the Son of God, that he died and then defeated death through the resurrection, like if somebody suggests that to you, you have to decide if that's real or not. And once you decide, if you decide to give your life to Jesus, if you decide to receive his gift of forgiveness in your life and his gift of new life, that new life cannot be kept hidden inside of you. Like the best news you know, like the pictures of the ring or the grandkids or the wedding, like the stories about that epic trip, like the recounting of the memories that you made, like that hole-in-one you shot, like that lifetime trophy you brought home. You must put on display your faith in Jesus. We do this as believers through baptism, believers' baptism. That's really important. We go public with our faith there, but that's not where it ends. We also must learn to share our faith with our own story. That's what John 9 is really about. This guy's story was that he had an encounter with Jesus, he was blind before it, and now he can see. What's your story? You have one, The question is, does anybody else know?
I grew up going to church because my parents were missionaries. We lived in Venezuela. Came back in 94, I believe. That's when I met this guy. I met him through a friend, through my roommate.
98.
We waited 8 months, I think, and were married in 99.
When I was younger, my family, we weren't a church family. And quite frankly, at that point in my life, I thought people that did were kind of silly.
We drifted I wanted to. I was trying to get him to go also. So we had our son, and our son passed away. Sorry.
His name was James Michael. We called him Jamie. And he's the toughest little guy I ever met. And it pulled me further away from God. At that time, it was hard for us because she knew the value of God. I didn't, and she was trying to lean into him at that point, and I was mad. And I felt so betrayed when I lost my son, and so I felt it drive a wedge between God and I, and the hope of a relationship that she had. It made that even more difficult. I remember being at the hospital, and going to the sanctuary down there and getting on my knees and praying. And it was the first time in my life I ever did anything like that.
God was working in our lives. Even though he may not have seen it, I did. And then I got pregnant again with my daughter. And we needed a change. I wanted it to be better for her.
She knew the whole time that God was what we needed. She wanted us to get into church.
And I kept telling him, let's try it out. And he was not really willing.
I didn't go in kicking and screaming just because I knew that would make a scene. But inside I was. When we went for the first time, I found it was enjoyable enough to where I would consider going back again. And one of the friends that we had that attended the church, he invited me to a men's group. To get to me is my belly. And I wanted to go to this new restaurant. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll go give it a shot. And Chris told him that I played drums. I don't even know how that came up. And I didn't play drums, but Chris threw me under the bus. And the pastor somehow had convinced me to show up the next night to a worship team practice and meet our worship coordinator, who at the time was Sandra Moore, who is the pastor of PCC Alet now. It was a few weeks after I had been going, and somehow Sandra Moore had convinced me that I was ready to be on the platform on Sunday. And I remember sitting there in the drum box, and I was so nervous, and I remember just saying a prayer to God. I said, man, I'm here. You got me here. I don't know how I got here so fast, because I was just sitting there like, man, 4 weeks ago, I was arguing with my wife to come here, and now I'm sitting behind a drum set on the platform at this church, and I'm nervous, and I prayed for God to give me a peace that the other people had, and just to give me what they had. And God showed up for me in that moment and gave me just a calm and just a really sense of security that I may not be comfortable with where I was at right then, but I was where He wanted me right then. And that was the first time in my life that I'd ever had that feeling that I knew I was right exactly where I was supposed to be. Even though I wasn't comfortable in my skin, I wanted to soak that moment up that I was having with God right there. It just had totally changed my life. And God used Sandra Moore to totally change my life. I'm thankful for how God has used the church and the people at our church to help guide and hold me accountable and answer questions when I don't know the answer and I'm struggling, and just the people that He has put in my life to help me. And I know that it's all beautifully orchestrated by Him, and I'm thankful for it, and thankful that I get to be a part of it.
I'm Audrey Reyes, and I'm just one.
And I'm Mike Reyes, and I'm her just one.
The journey towards faith often involves multiple people who are links in the chain. Now, Mike named 3 people: his wife Audrey, and his friend Chris, and his pastor Sandra. But there were other people in his journey as well, and each one of those people bore in their own way a witness, a testimony, if you will, not to some high theological concept, but simply to what Jesus had done in their lives. It wasn't just about church. It wasn't primarily about church. It was about their story of life change because of Jesus. The man in John chapter 9, he could say, look, I don't know a bunch of stuff, but I know this. I was blind, now I see, and it was Jesus who made that happen. And that experience, like other experiences, it shaped him. You know, some experiences, they define who you are. Having Susan in my life as my my life partner, my best friend, ministry partner, all the things. Having her in my life for 33 years, it hasn't just shaped me, it's defined me, changed me, healed me, made me better than I am. Raising 3 very different kids and seeing them journey into adulthood, that has defined me. Now getting to know the lives of my grandchildren, that has defined me. And so here's the point. When people get to know me, we don't travel very far down the road before you learn about these critical things who are part of who I am. But there's also the experience I've had with Jesus Christ. And that experience is also a central part of who I am. I am not the same person that I was before I had an encounter with Jesus, before I dedicated my life to Jesus. And there's evidence. There's evidence like the mud that was surely this guy kept some of. There is hard evidence that your encounter with Jesus Christ has changed you. Your own healing, spiritually at least, but maybe even emotionally healing or even physical healing. The healing of the relationships around you, the healing of your soul, the restoration, maybe the discovery of your life purpose, why you're even here. The change in you as a person, from your temptations to your actions and behaviors and choices, the way that you think, the way that you see the world. Many of those things, maybe more than those things, were changed as a result of the experience you had with Jesus. And now it's clear. You were blind. Now you see. So like the man born blind in John 9, people around us, people around you, especially for those of you who are followers of Jesus, they're watching. Their eyebrows are raised. They know you're not the same. Easter changed us. Jesus' encounter with that man that day happened when Jesus was physically here. But because of the resurrection, we are able to encounter the resurrected Jesus Christ, who has changed us just as tangibly as a man who was born blind, but now can see. And we have to invite people to hear our story in a way that's not awkward or weird or overbearing or threatening, but just invite them to understand why we're so different now than what we were before. Jesus changed me for the better. Jesus altered my life. He altered my destiny. Why wouldn't I want to invite other people to know the good news that has come to me? You have a story. You have a testimony. And the world will be better when we all learn to tell it.
This is my testimony, from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify, by Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony.
This is not just Tanner's testimony, it's yours too. Because you have a story. For every person here who has given their life to Jesus, you should also be able to bear witness to the change that has happened in you, even if that change is ongoing. So let's do this together. Let's declare it together. Our testimony from death to life. Because grace rewrote my story, and your story, and your story, and your story, and your story, and all of our stories. And together we testify. Let's sing.
This is my testimony, from death to life, 'cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify, by Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is our testimony.
Oh yeah, we get to come together and proclaim
claim that, y'all. All for Jesus. Come on. Come together, sons and daughters, bought with blood and washed in water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son, and Father. Our God will finish what He started. That's moving in our life. Our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Y'all can sing that to him, that's right. 'Cause greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. You're not done, you're not. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, then you're not done. Greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. My God is a shelter over me. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'm gonna testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. Sing it to her, come on. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive. This is my testimony from death to life. 'Cause grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm alive in you, Jesus. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
If grace has rewritten your story, then it's time to testify, to declare. You have a story, a testimony that somebody else needs to hear. So make sure you check out Brian's follow-up video on the website this week. And if you're ready to go public with your faith and declare that Jesus is your Lord, then sign up for baptism. You can do that on our website or just click on the link in the chat. Hey, thanks so much for being here today. We'll see you next Sunday for another answer to the question, now what? We'll see you then.
Yeah, I'm living the life.